Hi students, this is Ms. Wachuku again. Today we're going to be talking about short and long-term environmental impacts. Okay, so if you look at your screen, look at the words short-term environmental impact and long-term environmental impact. Okay, those are some examples on the picture. Our learning goal for today is 8.11b that says, we will explore how short and long-term environmental changes affect organisms and traits in subsequent populations. Remember that when I'm looking at the learning goal in class, when we're looking at the learning goal in class, we kind of underline some important vocabulary. So right here, we're going to be talking about short-term environmental changes and long-term environmental changes. How that does what? Affect organisms and traits. So how is it going to affect organisms and their traits? What do we mean by traits? Traits of an organism. So think, we've talked about those in last year in 7th grade. We talked about adaptations in subsequent populations. So maybe that word subsequent isn't really familiar to you, but by the end of the day or the lesson, you'll be able to know what subsequent means. Okay, so what we're going to do next is look at our success criteria. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain how short and long-term environmental changes affect organisms and traits in those subsequent populations. All right, so let's start off with a little bit of thinking to yourself. One of the worst U.S. environmental disasters occurred in 2010 when the Deepwater Horizon, an offshore drilling rig, spilled 4.9 million barrels of crude oil into the Gulf of Mexico. So we're going to think to ourselves, is this a short-term or a long-term environmental issue? Once again, 4.9 barrels of crude oil in the Gulf of Mexico. Man. Do you think it caused short-term or long-term, impacts? And if you think it was a short-term environmental issue or a long-term environmental issue, how did it impact humans as well as the environment? So what I'm asking you guys to do is, I know you may not have space in your guided notes. Go out on a separate sheet of paper, go ahead and answer those two. I'm not going to give you the answer yet. We're going to go ahead and come back to it, okay? We're going to come back to it and answer it by the end of this lesson, okay? But I'm going to give you guys a minute if you want to pause the video here so that you can go ahead and answer that question. All right. Next. So some key vocabulary, like I said, this TEK, if they're going to ask you any questions on STAR, which if they do, it's going to be very vocabulary intensive. You just need to know the vocabulary, be able to identify it, okay? So looking at the words, we have species. We talked about it in the previous lesson, right? Which is a large group of the same organism which reproduce with each other, okay? So we have a species of lions or a species of elephants. Elephants is one species. Lions is another species. Giraffes, another species. Okay. So once again, a large group of the same organism which reproduce with each other. Next, traits. And by the way, sorry, for example, tigers, there's several types of tigers. So each tiger would be a specific species. Traits, a distinguishing characteristic or quality. So what traits do Labradors have? Labrador dog, that long shaggy hair, as opposed to, for example, a boxer breed, they have that shorter hair. So once again, a distinguishing characteristic or quality. Bulldogs have that kind of wrinkly face to them, right? So once again, an English bulldog, sorry, a distinguishing characteristic. Next, organism, an individual, animal, plant, or single-celled life form. So organisms we saw, or we did talk about them in the previous video, where it could be an individual animal, like that elephant, like that giraffe, that antelope, or plant, for example, algae in the ocean or a bamboo plant in Asia, or single-celled life form, even bacteria and protists are a single-celled life form. Okay. Moving on, some more key vocabulary. Once again, make sure you guys are following along with your guided notes. And feel free to pause at any time. Adapted, the way an organism looks, behaves, or is built that best suits it for survival. So adaptation, right here we see this leopard, I believe, that has the perfect adaptation for its surroundings. Okay, this I believe it's a praying mantis, also has a good adaptation for its surroundings. Camouflage, being able to hide or disguise. And mutation, genetic change that causes new and different characteristics. So we see a mutation in that cat right there. All right, so I'm gonna give you guys a minute, use your notes, all right, to match the word to the definition. You can pause the video if you need more time. All right, moving on, okay. Here we see something that you guys discussed once again last year. The whole last unit for us, which was these two main things, was pretty much a review of 7th grade, okay? This right here, we see genetics. What would happen if the first generation of beetles looked like this? This might be their possible offspring. So if you have two, I'm guessing, dominant green beetles, then that would assure that all of them are green beetles, all right? So once again, we're looking at genetics right here. So we have population, a particular group of organisms living in the same area. So a population of hyenas, a population of lions, right? So a group of the same organism. Subsequent populations. We're gonna focus on that word subsequent. So right here we have the word root word right here. And I'm gonna add something to it, which is sequential. So sequent, it has some sort of sequence, or it's sequential, meaning first, second, third. So we're talking about what comes after the following generations. So you have mom and dad. The subsequent population would be the following generation, and then what follows after that, the next generation and the next generation. So subsequent, once again, some sort of sequence. So first, second, third, fourth generation, the next generations, okay? So hopefully that helps you remember subsequent populations. And the next thing, sorry guys, biodiversity. And this is also one that I'm going to mark. If you want to go ahead and mark that on your paper as well. It's kind of important. So in the previous video, we learned that bio means, and I'm just going to draw an arrow to it instead of trying to write with my computer, life. Bio means life, right? So if you have biodiversity, synonym of diversity is variety, to have a lot of variety. So would you want to go to Cece's Pizza that if it only had pepperoni and cheese, that's it, you just had two choices? Would you say that it had a lot of diversity or variety? Not really, right? So once again, diversity is you have a lot of options. There's a lot of variety, a lot of different options of life, okay? For example, the rainforest has it's the one ecosystem or biome that has the most biodiversity, okay? And we kind of talked about that in the previous video. On the other hand, the tundra has very little biodiversity, and that's just because of, the soil type, the conditions. Not everybody has those adaptations in order to survive in a tundra. Okay, so moving on. Sorry, technical difficulties. Okay, so moving on, more vocabulary. What does it mean to have abundant or abundance? If you have an abundant number of organisms, you have a large quantity of organisms. You have a lot. Extinct means it's no longer living. We have no living members of that species of animal, such as, the Tasmanian tiger, the West African black rhinoceros, the dodo bird. All of those animals are extinct, meaning they have no living members. Tolerance, the range of conditions an organism can withstand. So in that table on the side, it's talking about the tolerance level of water insects. And they're talking about how much pollution can they tolerate? Can they withstand? So we have a mayfly nymph, a stonefly nymph, which can tolerate very little or no pollution at all. Okay? Then a dragonfly also, very little or no pollution. Slight pollution would be a fly larva or a freshwater shrimp. Medium pollution would be that bloodworm. Okay? A lot of pollution. You can have some worms that can live in very polluted areas, a lot of pollution, or a rat-tailed maggot. And so far, there have been no live animals found in very polluted water. Okay, so once again, what's the tolerance of pollution in water, in our air, in not just like pollution, but also like what's the tolerance for drought? Some plants have more drought tolerance than others. Okay, so once again, different range of conditions. It just doesn't just have to be pollution. It can be like a tolerance for drought, a tolerance for the cold or heat. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and discuss some of these questions. You're going to have to answer them on your own, but I'm going to try to help you out as much as I can. So number 1, what can cause an animal population to decrease? Now, I'm not going to help you on this one because I want you to think about it. Okay? What would be some things that would cause an animal population to decrease? We talked about it in the last video too. Some of them were predator-prey relationships. Remember what happens if one increases and one decreases? Competition for something. I'm not going to say the answer. If you need to go back and watch that video, go ahead. But I want to see what you guys answer. What would cause an animal population to decrease? Number 2, I'm not going to help you, and I think I did mention some, but I want you to name an extinct animal. Do a little bit of research on this. Once again, I mentioned some of them, but do a little bit of research. Name an extinct animal. Number 3, tolerance. Tolerance is a range of conditions an organism can blank. I did mention it in the previous slide. Number 4, how do long-term environmental impacts change subsequent populations? What would be the kind of impact that would happen in subsequent populations if it's a long-term impact? Well, what would happen is you would have physical changes in DNA or extinction. Either they're going to adapt and they're going to actually have changes in their DNA, okay? Or they're just going to be completely wiped out. That's the answer for number 4. Can cause physical changes in their DNA, which would cause an adaptation or a mutation, or some sort of extinction, or just completely be, no more. Number 5, it's important to have a great variety of life in an ecosystem or What does that, I mentioned that word, variety of life. The prefix for life and variety. So that's the definition for what word? Number 6, abundance means. What does having an abundance of something mean? Okay, so I'll let you guys answer those questions. All right, so what we're going to do is you have your packet, and we're going to go ahead and cut this out, and we're going to be building kind of like a foldable, okay? And it'll be a T-chart, and I'm going to read over some notes that you're going to be writing in there. So I'm going to show you how it should look. So right here, you'll write the short-term impacts. So for short-term, I believe it's maybe like 1, 2, 3, and 4. The next slide will say them. And then down here, go ahead and write down your examples. I'm so sorry, guys. I am writing with this computer. I wish I had a touch screen. So examples down here, okay? And then it'll also list a couple of things. So once again, this is kind of like what your paper should have. And if you don't want to write it in there, I believe it's also in another page of your packet, okay? So starting off with, all right, so do you think a drought, looking at this one right here, do you think a drought would be a short-term or long-term? Think about it. So you're talking about more than 5 years, okay? Climate change, long-term is if it's about more than 5 years. So would a drought last more than 5 years? Maybe. So these can all be changed. Right now, fill out this one right here. And if you get them wrong, it's okay. We learn from our mistakes. Go ahead and fill this out. I'll give you guys some time. You can pause the video so you can fill this out, and then I'll go over them right now. So you have drought, climate change, urbanization, radioactive waste, a blizzard, or a flood. What happened here? Pause the video. All right, short-term impact. These occur quickly. They happen quickly. It affects organisms immediately, okay? Behavior of the organism changes. The effect usually lasts 5 years or less, okay? So less than 5 years. Some examples. So you're gonna write these right here under, remember where I said impact? It's about 4 of them. And then the examples down at the bottom. Examples, droughts. For the most part, droughts don't last, about more than 5 years. And nature has a way of recovering from droughts. See, flooding, if a river overflows its banks, it happens very quickly, and immediately the organisms are affected. Those animals, even humans, have to leave quickly because we are also an organism. And plants may be ripped away very quickly, but normally the water subsides, and once again, the effect is less than 5 years. Volcanic eruptions, pollution, controlled forest fires, smog, and blizzards. These are very quick, but for the most part, they also, nature has a way of recovering from these fairly quickly. Long-term impact occurs slowly over time, affects organisms over subsequent generations, meaning the next generation will start to change or will start to adapt. It causes physical changes in DNA of the organism, and it can cause extinction of the species. So like, for example, polar bears, they're noticing that polar bears' fur is actually less thick than they used to be several years ago, okay? Why? Because now it's getting warmer. They don't need that super thick fur. So deforestation, some examples are deforestation, urbanization, climate change, radioactive waste pollution. So for the most part, these don't happen overnight. they happened slowly over time. And also, for the most part, there's no going back. So once they cut those trees, for the most part, they're not going to go back and plant more trees. Kind of just leave it there. And most of the time, like in front of SCLE, we have deforestation to create urbanization, to create brand new homes or housing. So like I said, once they cut down those trees, they're not going to rebuild, or it's not going to return back to normal, because now you have homes on top of there. Climate change, radioactive waste pollution. Let's look at some scenarios. We have warmer water temperatures brought on by climate change. Warmer water temperatures brought on by climate change stress coral reefs. They are very sensitive to temperature variations. Tiny plant cells within the coral die if temperatures remain high for weeks on end. This can cause coral bleaching. The health of the coral then declines. So go ahead and think to yourself, is this a short-term environmental issue or a long-term environmental issue? Excuse my daughter in the background. So would this happen quickly or slowly? And do you think that the temperature of the water can ever diminish back again? What do you think? Is it short-term or long-term? Once again, pause the video if you need more time to think. But I can tell you that it is long-term, because once again, the water temperatures are only increasing. And once, for example, that's why we're very protective of our reefs, because once they're gone, they may be gone forever. Okay? Next, scenario 2. American beaches are often contaminated by bacteria carried in raw sewage, animal waste, and storm water runoff. Think to yourself, is this a short-term or long-term environmental issue? What would be the impact on humans as well as the environment? All right, so I'll let you guys think and discuss this one. All right, scenario 3. This is maybe something you can do. Choose some type of environmental impact and write your own scenario of what happens. Okay, so what you're going to do, once again, think of a possible pollution, overpollution, water disposal, climate change, loss of habitat, deforestation, loss of biodiversity, acid rain, urbanization. So what would be some possible impacts on humans and animals and wildlife? All right. What could be some things that have brought it on? Or, for example, some things that have already happened. Give me a specific example. So once again, those are just some ideas that you can do if you're bored and maybe you want to do some more research. So going back to this one right here, Deepwater Horizon. As bad as it was, guys, like it said, it was one of the worst U.S. environmental disasters. This is actually a short-term environmental issue, because the Gulf of Mexico is bouncing back. Now, yes, it did take longer than 5 years, but immediately the next year, you could already see that nature was getting better. So it didn't take too long. It was actually less than 5 years that you started to see wildlife come back, that you started to see fish come back to the Gulf. And so we've learned from this. We actually had a lot of lessons that the US and scientists learned, and we were actually able to semi-contain the effects. All right, so this one is actually a short-term environmental issue. So hopefully by now you're able to explain how short and long-term environmental changes affect organism and traits in subsequent populations. All right, guys. Once again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or Miss Hool or any of your science teachers and through Schoology. And like I said, we'll try to answer you as fast as we can. Have a great day, guys.